My name is Maxwell Sullivan. I am 34 years old and I live in Riverside Heights, a suburban area that prides itself on community values and pristine lawns. I am a husband and a father and I work from home, which gives me the option to balance my job and my family life. I enjoy spending my free time tinkering with my cars, which my son and I see as more than mere vehicles, they are projects. Recently, however, my peaceful existence was shattered by my neighbor, Patricia, a busybody with too much time on her hands and an insatiable need to meddle in other people's lives, including mine. She has a knack for making people uncomfortable with her relentless complaints, particularly targeting my family. One day, while I was setting up for a video meeting, I noticed a man taking pictures of our cars from across the street. A chill of realization ran down my spine. It was code enforcement. I immediately stepped outside to confront him and learned that he had received a complaint about our cars, which in his eyes were labeled as abandoned. To my horror, he slipped up and referred to the borrowed car which was parked in our driveway. I realized then that Patricia had done it again. She was the only one who knew we borrowed that car, and right after one of her infamous rants about our driveway, the code enforcement officer was at my door. This was not the first time I found myself at odds with Patricia. Looking at my cars, I felt pride because they were not just idle objects, they were part of my family's life. I informed the inspector that all but one of them were daily drivers, and I planned to repair the other one soon. But when I later read her complaint online, it became clear how low she was willing to stoop. She falsely claimed that we had multiple abandoned vehicles cluttering both our property and the street for over 2 years. The audacity! I felt a surge of anger mingled with disbelief. To add insult to injury, the borrowed car had an expired sticker, prompting the officer to indicate that he would need to return in a week to check on it and would take photographs. After he left, my son and I quickly rummaged through the glove box and managed to find the sticker. Thank goodness we could keep the borrowed car on the road. The inspector's words echoed in my head and I knew we had to stay ahead of him. However, this situation only made my resentment for Patricia grow stronger. Between her constant complaints and her attempts to ruin our good standing in the neighborhood, she had positioned herself as our nemesis. I was consciously aware of how low she could go, but I never imagined I would find a way to turn the tables on her. A few days later, while scouting online for information about code enforcement violations, I stumbled upon a website that revealed open complaints for specific addresses. My curiosity piqued, so I decided to look up Patricia's address, and I was taken aback by what I found. On the very same day the inspector came to my house, there were two new complaints against her property. One was for an overgrown, trash-filled backyard, and the other was a zoning violation. My mind bubbled with sinister plots as I imagined what had been going on in her chaotic life. I could envision her complaining to anyone who would listen, blaming the world for her problems while maintaining the pristine image of morality she loved to project. And now she was sitting on a pile of violations and a warning that could soon translate into fines or even more serious actions from the city. The thought was intoxicating. As I contemplated my next move, I started to gather all the evidence I could find. I documented her backyard claim and began to connect the dots. I reminded myself she had constructed small renovations around her house, claiming to have received all the necessary permits, but I found no record of any permits granted to her in the past 7 years. It was beyond ironic that she would accuse me of neglect while living in a house with serious violations looming over it. With each passing day, I grew bolder. I decided to file a complaint against her. It felt more than satisfying, it felt necessary, a way to restore balance and protect my family from her petty, vengeful antics. Standing before the code enforcement office and placing my complaint form onto the desk, a voice inside me whispered, "This is your answer." I felt empowered, almost liberated in a way I hadn't in years. However, my journey was not without its challenges. Patricia caught wind of what I was doing. One fateful afternoon, I returned home to find her standing on my front porch, eyes blazing with indignation, accusations flying from her mouth. She insisted I was being a bad neighbor and that I would regret this. Her contempt fueled my resolve, and I politely pointed out that I was only ensuring our neighborhood remained safe and pleasant for everyone, including her. As the days passed, I braced myself for the impending results of my filing. The inspector visited both our properties, and I waited with bated breath to see how this would all unfold. It was almost poetic. While I had taken measures to ensure compliance, Patricia was deep in her web of violations and unkept promises. She began to panic, her desperate attempts to clean up her yard becoming frantic as the city officials dug deeper into her history. Finally, the day arrived that the city decided to take action against her. As I stood outside, witnessing Patricia receiving the news of her violations and impending fines, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. My heart was racing, torn between the satisfaction of seeing her held accountable and the moral dilemma of revenge. This was justice, or at least my version of it. Patricia was forced to clean up her act and her neighborhood image began to tarnish. Suddenly, the woman known for her constant complaints and busybody tendencies became the center of new rumors. Everyone began to question what went on behind her closed doors. People began to share their own stories of her incessant need to control, and slowly but surely the tide began to turn. I had been the one pushed into a corner, and I chose to fight back not through bitterness or anger, but by taking the moral high ground. The consequences of my actions altered not just her world, but mine as well. I felt lighter, free from the shackles of Patricia's presumptuous interference in my life. As life returned to its new normal in Riverside Heights, the vindictive story of the neighbors' complaints faded, but my resolve remained. I had found strength I did not know I had, faced a daunting challenge, and emerged victorious. Patricia may have begun the conflict, but I had rewritten the narrative. With every brief encounter after that, I could sense that the balance in our relationship had shifted. She no longer saw me as a mere neighbor. I was now an equal, one who could stand up for myself and my family. Even now, as I sit back and reflect on the twisted path that had once ensnared me, I am reminded that sometimes it takes a move of courage to hold people accountable for their actions. I smiled to myself knowing that in a neighborhood where glass houses mattered, I had learned to defend my own little refuge against unnecessary drama. As for Patricia, perhaps next time she would think before throwing stones.